I want you to think about um, a deeply ingrained belief, probably one of the very first things you were taught about how the world actually works.
Right, the whole the meritocracy idea.
Exactly. The idea that if you just put your head down, learn a valuable skill and work incredibly hard, you will be rewarded with this proportional slice of wealth.
It's clean, it's binary, and honestly, it's deeply comforting to believe that.
It really is. It's the foundation of how most of us navigate our careers. We just assume this direct, linear relationship between effort and income.
You bake the most layers, you get the biggest slice of the pie. That's the logic.
But then, you step out of the classroom and into the actual real-world economy, and you look around, and there's this glaring, massive contradiction staring right at you.
Oh, absolutely. The data just does not support the fairy tale.
Right. Because if hard work is the primary engine of wealth, why are the people working the most grueling, bone-crushing hours, the people physically keeping society running? Why are they consistently taking home the absolute smallest slice of the pie?
And conversely, why do individuals in specific, corporate sectors take home massive multiples of that wealth without necessarily producing a proportional increase in actual value?
Exactly. So when you look at the raw data of income distribution, that comforting meritocracy just completely shatters.
It really does. What you're observing isn't a failure of individual effort. It's not about personal skill at all.
No, it's about the rules of the game.
Yeah.
You're observing a system where the rules of wealth distribution were quietly locked into place long before you ever even walked into an interview room.
Long before you were even born, in a lot of cases.
Right. So today on this deep dive, we are ripping open the corporate ledgers of thousands of companies across two completely different continents. We're going to prove a point that might make you entirely rethink your career.
Yeah, we are bringing the absolute undeniable mathematical receipts today. We're showing how a massive portion of the wealth you generate is just quietly siphoned away.
We're not just debating philosophy here. So let's unpack this. We have a monumental, highly rigorous working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research to guide us.
Yes, NBER working paper number 21416 is by three top economists, Sabine Daboulaire, Rodolfo Lauterbach, and Jacques Mares.
And what I love about this is that they didn't just look at, high-level GDP guesses, right?
No, not at all. They used an astronomical amount of unique micro-evidence. We are talking about the actual line-by-line corporate accounting books from manufacturing firms.
Which is wild. And they specifically chose to dissect the exact same manufacturing industries across two countries with radically different economic operating systems.
Chile and France.
Right. And the mission of this deep dive is to reveal how these two nations chose entirely different destinies for their workers.
We're going to prove, mathematically, that your paycheck is determined far more by market power and institutional rules than by your personal work ethic.
Which is just a massive slap in the face to common sense.
Yeah.
But by the time we finish walking through this data, the way you view your salary, your company's profit margins, even your trips to the grocery store, it's all going to be fundamentally altered.
Absolutely. We're going to map out the exact mathematical matrix that dictates who gets rich and who barely survives.
Okay, so to really test this theory, to prove these rules aren't just academic concepts that only matter when times are good, we need a stress test.
Right, because any system looks functional when there's endless cheap credit.
Exactly. The real question is, what happens to the worker when the floor suddenly drops out?
A crisis is the ultimate revealer of structural integrity. It strips away the noise and shows you exactly who holds the power to protect themselves and who gets thrown overboard.
So let's set the scene. We're going back to the late 1990s, specifically the fallout of the 1998 Asian financial crisis.
A massive economic earthquake. It started in currency markets and just sent these violent shockwaves across the entire globe. Supply chains froze, demand dried up.
But here is the bizarre reality the NBER paper highlights. When this exact same global crisis hit, it absolutely smashed the livelihoods of Chilean workers.
But French workers in the exact same industries barely felt a breeze.
Wait, really? How drastic was the difference?
The divergence in the raw production data is just staggering. The researchers looked at the crisis years of 1998 and 1999. In Chile, manufacturing output simply fell off a cliff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it plummeted by 2.1% in 98 and then accelerated into this incredible 7.3% contraction in 1999.
That is brutal.
Across the entire period the study covers, the average real firm output growth in Chile was actually negative, a negative 0.4%.
So if you're a factory worker there, that means massive layoffs, Frozen wages, slashed benefits, entire communities plunging into distress.
Exactly. The financial storm washed the ordinary worker right out to sea in Latin America. But then you look at France.
Right. What happened in France during the exact same storm?
France comfortably cruised through this period with an average manufacturing growth rate of 3.2%. The domestic base absorbed the shock and just kept expanding.
Okay, let me stop and play devil's advocate for a moment here. Because my immediate reaction is, isn't this just comparing apples and oranges?
How do you mean?
Well, France is a historic economic powerhouse, right?
Yeah.
Centuries of industrial capital. Chile is dealing with the legacy of being an emerging market. Are we really just discovering that rich countries are richer?
That is precisely the critique the NBER researchers anticipated. If they had just compared total GDP, the study would be useless.
Right, it wouldn't prove anything.
But that is the beauty of this firm-level microdata. They didn't compare whole economy. They compared exact matching industries.
Oh, so like textiles to textiles.
Exactly. A Chilean textile plant compared specifically to a French textile plant. Metal processing to metal processing. Rubber to rubber.
So they controlled for the machinery, the goods produced, the general skill level of the workers.
Yes. By matching the specific industries, they effectively stripped away those macroeconomic variables. What was left were the naked structural differences in the rules of the game.
The actual institutional environments.
Exactly. On one side, the legacy of intense neoliberalism and deregulation in Chile. On the other, the post-war tradition of social solidarity and heavy labor regulation in France.
Okay, so it wasn't that French companies were magically better at inventing widgets, or that French workers worked twice as hard. They were just operating under totally different rules regarding who absorbs the pain of an economic shock.
Precisely. The Chilean system forced workers to absorb the contraction. The French system shielded them.
This brings up the core challenge, though. If the rules are different and the outcomes are vastly different, how do we scientifically measure the exact degree to which a worker is getting screwed?
Right, because terms like exploitation are highly subjective. They're loaded political words.
We need an objective mathematical tool, something that strips away the politics and just looks at the flow of value.
And that tool is what economists call the wedge. This is where the methodology gets incredibly clever. They built on an econometric framework developed by Robert Hall in 1988.
Okay, let's break down this wedge, because if I'm understanding this right, the single mathematical concept is the key to understanding why your bank account looks the way it does.
At its most fundamental level, the wedge is just the gap between two numbers, an input's marginal product and its actual cost.
So in labor terms.
The marginal product of labor is the exact amount of extra financial value you add to a company's top line simply by showing up and doing your job.
Right.
And the cost is your total compensation. Wage, benefits, payroll taxes.
Okay, let me try to visualize this with an everyday analogy. Imagine you work in a bakery, right? You're a baker. And one day, you invent this brilliant new way to knead the dough.
Okay, I like this.
Without using any extra ingredients, you are suddenly able to bake 10 extra loaves of bread every single hour. And the bakery sells those extra loaves for $5 each. So your innovation brings in an extra $50 of revenue every hour. That $50 is your marginal product of labor.
Perfect setup. According to strict classical economic theory, the stuff you learn in a freshman textbook, in a perfectly competitive market, your wage should eventually rise to match your marginal product.
So I should get that full $50.
Exactly. Because if your boss doesn't pay you the $50, a competing bakery down the street will see your value, hire you away, and pay you $49 just to get that extra dollar of profit.
Competition is supposed to force wages to match the value created.
Supposed to, yes.
But we know that is not what happens in the real world. In reality, you show your boss the extra $50 in the register, and they pat you on the back, call you a team player, and maybe give you a raise of $10 an hour.
Which leaves a gap. You generated $50 of new value. You were paid $10 in new value. The remaining $40. That is the wedge. That $40 vanishes from the labor side of the ledger and reappears on the capital side as pure excess profit, or what economists call rent.
So the wedge is the literal mathematical measurement of extraction. It's the dollar amount of the value you created that you were not allowed to keep.
Exactly. And what these researchers set out to do was calculate the size of that wedge across thousands of companies.
And here's the crucial insight, right? The size of that wedge is almost never determined by how greedy your specific boss is.
No, the bakery owner isn't necessarily an evil cartoon villain. The size of the wedge is hard-coded into the institutional rules of the market.
So to map how this extraction works globally, the researchers designed this brilliant six-part matrix of power.
A matrix of power, yes. They divided the economy based on the power dynamics in two separate arenas. The product market, where the company sells goods, and the labor market, where they buy your time.
Okay, let's start with the product market side.
They define two possible regimes. First is perfect competition, or PC. There are tons of companies fighting for the exact same customers, selling identical products.
So companies have no pricing power.
Right. They have to sell at exactly the marginal cost of production. If they raise the price by a penny, consumers instantly go to a competitor. They are price takers.
But the alternative regime is imperfect competition. I see.
This is where you have monopolies, oligopolies, or just highly differentiated brands. Consumers don't have infinite choices, so these companies have market power. They become price makers,
So they can arbitrarily mark up the price far beyond what it costs to make.
generating massive excess profits. That's the product side. Now we cross-reference that with the labor side, where there are three distinct settings.
Okay, what's setting number one?
Perfect competition in labor, which often equates to the right to manage model, PR. Under PR, the employer holds all the cards. They set the wage unilaterally and can hire or fire at will.
It's a total take it or leave it dynamic. You accept the wage or you go be unemployed.
Exactly. The second labor setting is efficient bargaining, or EB. Here, workers have organized collective power, a strong union, or state-backed labor laws.
So they don't just accept a wage. They sit at the table and actively negotiate.
And crucially, they negotiate exactly how those excess profits, the rents, are shared between capital and labor.
Okay, and the third labor setting.
Monopsony, MO, the darkest extreme. There is literally only one buyer of labor, like an isolated coal mining town in the 1800s.
If you don't like the wage, you don't just lose the negotiation, you starve because there's no other employer for 100 miles.
Right. So we have this 2x3 matrix, perfect or imperfect competition on the product side, right to manage, efficient bargaining, or monopsony on the labor side.
And the researchers took tens of thousands of corporate ledgers and meticulously sorted every single industry into one of these 6 boxes.
And the results? Well, they completely demolish the conventional wisdom we base our society on.
Prepare to have your Economics 101 textbook thrown in the trash. We're all taught that we live in a perfectly competitive free market. Prices naturally settle, supply meets demand, everyone gets a fair deal.
It's a highly persistent economic myth that textbook free market essentially does not exist in the modern manufacturing sectors of these nations.
The numbers are just stunning. They looked at 20 distinct manufacturing industries in France. Guess how many operate under perfect competition?
Zero.
100% of the 20 French manufacturing industries studied operate under imperfect competition, monopolies or oligopolies.
And in Chile, 60% of the industries operate under imperfect competition. But here's the kicker. Those 60% of industries contain 87% of all the total firms in the study.
Think about the implications of that for your daily life. Every time you buy clothing or food or hardware, the odds are overwhelmingly high that you are paying a monopoly tax.
Firms have consolidated such enormous power over the product market that they just name their price and extract extra cash from your wallet.
Which creates this vast pool of excess profits. And that sets up the most critical question. If these companies have all this monopoly money from overcharging us, how do they treat the workers asking for a share?
This is where the destinies of Chile and France violently diverge.
I call this the tale of two labor markets, the invisible whip versus the shield. And there's a massive paradox here. We assume that if workers want a share of monopoly profits, they need a union. So the country with stronger unions must have better outcomes, right?
Seems like simple logic, but the data reveals the exact opposite. Chile actually has a significantly higher percentage of trade union members than France.
Wait, really? What are the numbers?
In Chile, 14% of the workforce belongs to a union. In France, union membership is astonishingly low, only 8%.
Okay, so by conventional logic, Chilean workers should have more bargaining power. But the reality is a complete inversion. French workers wield absolute dominant power, while Chilean workers can be terminated almost at will. How is that structurally possible?
Let's look at where they landed in the matrix. In Chile, the dominant system is the ICPR regime. Imperfect competition in products, right to manage in labor. A staggering 80% of Chilean industries fall into this PR mode.
Meaning the employer has virtually dictatorial power. They just unilaterally set the price of labor.
Precisely. And that 14% union membership. In Chile, collective bargaining is deeply fragmented. It happens almost entirely at the isolated plant level.
So a union might exist at one factory, but they're fighting a localized battle against a massive corporate giant.
Exactly. Overall, collective bargaining only protects about 24% of workers there.
So even in a union, you're standing alone in a dark alley against a corporation. If you push too hard, they just close that specific plant. This is the invisible whip, a system designed to keep labor terrified.
Now, contrast that with the institutional reality of France. The dominant system is the ICEB regime, efficient bargaining. 60% of French industries, covering 73% of all firms, operate under this model.
And here is the magic trick. Even though actual union membership is just 8%, the collective bargaining coverage in France protects 95% of the workforce.
95%.
8% membership providing 95% protection. That sounds like a typo. How does a tiny union throw a protective shield over the entire country?
It comes down to state-backed frameworks. In France, wage negotiations happen at the national industry-wide level, and the law includes a mechanism called administrative extension.
Administrative extension, how does that work?
If a small 8% union wins a wage increase from the Industry Employer Association, the French Ministry of Labor steps in. They legally mandate that this new agreement applies to every single company and worker in that entire industry.
Oh, wow. Regardless of whether those workers pay union dues.
Exactly.
So in Chile, you fight for survival factory by factory. In France, the government essentially uses the union's victory to forge a magic shield for everyone. If you work at a small non-union firm, you still get the raise the union negotiated at the conglomerate across town.
Yes. But we have to acknowledge the historical paths that created this. Chile's labor market was heavily shaped by a history of intense social stratification and the Pinochet military dictatorship in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
That regime deliberately dismantled labor protections to make labor hyper-flexible and cheap. They intentionally engineered the right-to-manage system.
To break the power of the worker. While France operates on a tradition of post-WWII social solidarity.
Exactly. The state intervened to ensure wealth distribution and prevent social upheaval.
Okay, this is fascinating. But before we get to the exact dollar amounts, before we see how much money this shield saves workers, I have to push back on the methodology again.
Sure.
Any statistician listening is probably screaming about data integrity right now. Economic data is notoriously messy. How do we know the researchers aren't just seeing what they want to see?
You're hitting on the biggest hurdle in econometric research, the danger of confusing coincidence with causality. It's known as endogeneity.
Endogeneity. Okay, break that down for me in English.
Let's go back to the bakery analogy. You look at the ledger and you notice two things happening at once. Wages went up and sales skyrocketed. A sloppy economist concludes that higher wages magically cause people to buy more bread.
But what if it's reversed? What if the owner knew a massive secret contract was coming, so they proactively raised wages to keep their bakers happy?
Exactly. The new contract caused the wage increase. If you don't separate the chicken from the egg, you're confusing cause with effect. Your whole matrix is false.
So how did the researchers solve this?
They deployed an incredibly sophisticated mathematical tool called the System GMM estimator. Specifically, the Erlano-Bover and Blundell-Bond two-step method.
Okay, let me stop you right there before we drown in statistical jargon. How does this mathematical washing machine actually work?
It relies on something called instrumental variables, using lagged inputs. Instead of looking at what the company is doing today, which is messy and entangled, the math looks at decisions made 2, 3, or 4 years ago.
Wait, how does looking at the past solve the chicken and egg problem of today?
Think of it this way. A secret contract signed today might influence today's wages. But a secret contract signed today cannot possibly influence the amount of flour the bakery purchased 3 years ago.
Oh, the past is mathematically immune to the present.
Exactly. By using these historical lagged decisions as a baseline, the System GMM estimator effectively washes out the temporary blips and the reverse causality.
It strips away the noise and leaves the pure, naked truth of how the power flows.
Yes. And once they ran the data for all 16,000 firms through this massive filter, they were specifically hunting for that third labor category, the monopsony.
The ultimate evil of the company town. Did they find it?
This is a truly shocking twist. Across all 20 industries in both France and Chile, after applying the System GMM estimator, the prevalence of monopsony was exactly 0%.
Wait, zero. Absolutely zero evidence of a single buyer market. Does that mean the labor market is actually fair? Because that contradicts everything we just talked about.
No, it doesn't mean it's fair. It means something far more insidious. It means capital doesn't need to build a literal cartoonish company town to exploit you.
Wow.
They don't need to be the only employer in a 100-mile radius. The right to manage system in Chile does the job of exploiting workers with terrifying efficiency without ever meeting the technical definition of a monopsony.
So when 80% of an economy operates under unilateral employer power, where firing is as easy as breathing, the ambient threat of destitution creates the exact same downward pressure on wages.
That is the revelation. You don't need a monopoly on jobs if the rules universally ensure the worker always loses.
Okay, the data is mathematically clean. Monopsony isn't the primary culprit. It's right to manage versus efficient bargaining. It's time to look at the exact dollars and cents. When you finally sit at the bargaining table, who gets what?
Let's set up a direct comparison. Two manufacturing workers, one in Chile, one in France, both sit down with their monopolistic bosses. Both companies are generating excess economic rents because they are overcharging consumers.
How much of that excess profit does the worker actually capture? Let's look at the rent-sharing parameter.
In France, operating under that efficient bargaining shield, the workers take home an incredible 43.1% of the economic rents.
Nearly half the excess monopoly profit goes straight back into the workers' pockets. That is a formidable share. What about the Chilean worker?
In Chile, even within the minority of industries that do establish efficient bargaining, their leverage is so crippled by the broader environment that they only capture 28.7% of the rents.
43.1% versus 28.7%. The invisible rules are literally siphoning away over a third of the wealth the Chilean worker could have had.
But the tragedy doesn't stop there. This brings us to the double squeeze.
Right, because you get paid, but then you have to take that artificially small paycheck and survive in an economy dominated by imperfect competition.
Exactly. The researchers calculated the exact price markup parameter, denoted by mu. French companies extract a median price markup of 1.378. They charge about 37.8% more than the marginal cost of production.
Which is a healthy monopoly profit. But what happens when the Chilean worker goes to the store?
Chilean companies extract a median price markup of 1.543. They are charging a massive 54.3% above the cost of production.
This is where the sheer brutality clicks into place. If I am a Chilean worker, I am trapped in a relentless double squeeze. First, my labor is bought incredibly cheap. I only get 28.7% of the rents.
Right.
Then I take my meager wages to the grocery store or the pharmacy, and because it's a hyper-monopolized landscape with an absurd 54.3% markup, my paycheck is instantly devoured by the artificially high cost of living.
It's the ultimate closed loop of extraction. Squeezed on the way in, squeezed on the way out.
It's enraging, but it brings up a really crucial question. Is geography destiny? Can the French social safety net protect everyone?
Actually, researchers found the French shield is not impenetrable. When they broke the data down by sector, they discovered industry heterogeneity.
Meaning some industries didn't follow the national rules?
Yes. 13 out of 20 industries varied across the two countries. But specific sectors, textiles, leather goods, rubber, and mineral products, fell into the brutal ICPR category in both France and Chile.
Wait, imperfect competition and right to manage. Why did the French government's magic extension mechanism fail the textile worker?
Think about the physical nature of textiles and footwear. They are subject to hyper-intense global competition, and their supply chains are incredibly mobile.
Oh, you can pack up sewing machines and move to Asia in a few weeks. You can't do that with a heavy metal blast furnace.
Exactly. The threat of offshoring is so credible that it completely nullifies the workers' bargaining power. Globalization overrides local labor laws. The union can't demand 43% of the rents if the employer can just delete the factory.
So capital is global, but labor is local. That's a race to the bottom. Okay, but for the traditional French workers who are securely under the shield, we have to ask a very uncomfortable question. Where does their extra money actually come from?
This brings us to perhaps the most unsettling finding in the entire paper: a dark, secret collusion between strong labor unions and monopolistic corporations.
Unions and monopolies working together. That sounds totally contradictory.
They fight over the division of the pie, yes, but they both have a vested interest in making sure the pie is as massive as possible.
Oh, wow.
The data showed a highly significant correlation, greater than 0.6, between the price markup a company charges and the extent of rent sharing with the workers in both countries.
Let me process that. A correlation over 0.6 is massive. You're saying the higher the monopoly markup a company arbitrarily charges the consumer, the higher the share of profits the union gets to take home.
Precisely. A union can only extract a 43% share of excess profits if there are massive excess profits to extract in the first place.
Right. If a company is in perfect competition, selling at cost, there are no rents to share.
Exactly. High union wages are fundamentally dependent on the company's ability to successfully gouge consumers in an imperfect market.
That is a wild paradigm shift.
Yeah.
The union and the monopoly are basically locked in a symbiotic relationship, feeding off a shared host. You, the consumer.
And this has profound implications for macroeconomic policy. For decades, politicians have pushed for deregulation. Break up monopolies, lower prices for the consumer. Sounds great, right?
But look at the causal chain. If you deregulate and force competition, prices drop. The consumer wins. But what happens to the company's ledger?
The profit margins shrink instantly. The economic rents evaporate. And then the company can no longer afford to sustain those high union wages.
So they go to war with the union.
Exactly. They break the collective bargaining agreements, change labor laws, and systematically transition the market from efficient bargaining down to the unilateral right to manage called just to survive.
Wow. So deregulating your shopping cart directly deregulates your paycheck.
Yeah.
If society demands cheap goods, we are inadvertently destroying the profit margins that historically funded middle-class labor protections.
It is an impossible, tragic catch-22. You cannot alter the product market without violently disrupting the labor market, and this massive distortion comes with a severe national cost.
Right. It degrades the entire society's potential. The researchers measure this macro cost through a metric called total factor productivity, or TFP.
Yes. TFP dispersion.
Let's explain this simply. Imagine the economy is a massive city with hundreds of kitchens. Capital and labor are the ingredients. In an efficient economy, the best ingredients naturally flow to the most brilliant chefs. That's high TFP.
Right.
But in these distorted economies, a brilliant local chef who wants to open a revolutionary restaurant can't get a loan. Meanwhile, a terrible, overpriced fast food chain gets millions in funding just because they have the monopoly power to crush competitors and suppress wages.
That's a highly accurate visualization of resource misallocation. The ingredients go to the wrong kitchens.
So what did the researchers find about this waste in France versus Chile?
France had a TFP standard deviation of about 10.0%. Some inefficiency, which is unavoidable. But in Chile, the TFP standard deviation explodes to 17.5%.
Over 17%. That gap between the brilliant chef and the terrible fast food joint is canyon-sized.
When labor is bought artificially cheap and goods are sold with 54% markups, the market signals are completely broken. Capital flows to inefficient monopolies just because they have entrenched power.
It makes the entire nation vastly less efficient and innovative. It's a parasitic dynamic.
Exactly. So let's step back and look at the monumental landscape we've uncovered.
We started with a frustrating question. Why doesn't hard work equal wealth? And this microdata gave us a stark answer. The structural matrix of market power dictates the outcome of your life before you even clock in.
We saw how the wedge mathematically measures the value that vanishes into corporate rents. We saw the myth of the perfect free market.
We explored France's institutional shield, where an 8% union protects 95% of workers, and contrasted that with Chile's invisible whip, where workers capture only 28% of the rents while suffering a 54% cost of living markup.
And we face the uncomfortable truth that strong labor protections are often quietly subsidized by monopoly pricing.
But as we wrap up, we can't leave this in the late 90s. The world hasn't stood still. Are we all slowly becoming Chilean workers today?
Look at the defining economic shift of the last decade. The gig economy, rideshare drivers, delivery workers. These platforms are massive monopolistic product markets with huge pricing power over the consumer.
But they classify workers as independent contractors, bypassing traditional labor laws. There is no efficient bargaining shield.
You open an app, and an opaque algorithm dictates your exact wage for that specific minute. It calculates the minimum amount to get you to accept. You don't negotiate, you just get deactivated by the code.
It's the invisible whip, but made of code. The algorithm is the new right-to-manage mode. The institutional protections of the 20th century are rapidly collapsing.
History is rhyming in a dangerous way. When the algorithm becomes the unilateral boss, what new institutional shield will we have to build to protect ourselves? Because the math shows one absolute certainty. Without a shield, the wedge will only grow wider.
And the value you create will continue to vanish upward. That is a terrifying thought to sit with the next time you order a rideshare or look at your pay stub. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the matrix, keep demanding your share of the wedge, and we'll see you next time.